some beer. I haven't done this in about 25 years, so we'll see how it goes. For my first try, I thought I could make an IPA, and since I haven't done this in a while, I bought a kit from my local homebrew shop. This is a IPA kit from BSG. And opening up the kit, you can see it includes 2 cans of malt extract, some hop pellets, 2 different flavors, 1 bag of caramel malt, bottle caps, sugar, some heavy roasting chips, and brewing yeast. For equipment, I picked up a few things from my homebrew shop. I bought a starter kit, which includes this fermentation bucket. It's for a 5-gallon batch, and it comes pre-marked with some measurements here. It's important to note that this bucket lid has a little hole on top because that's where you put the fermentation lock. And this lets the CO2 out without letting any air or contaminants back in. Got a hydrometer, came with a kit. I picked up a stirring stick, and I also have a cooking pot, stainless steel. I think that's about 20 quarts. And one of the most important things about brewing, it's very important to sanitize everything so that you don't have any contaminants competing with the yeast during the fermentation process. So one of the things I'll be doing is sanitizing the bucket, the lid. Bleach works, but I picked up this product here, Star San, which is a acid sanitizer. It just takes a little bit of this to sanitize everything. I took off the labels of the 2 cans of malt extract and opened them up and put them in the sink here with some warm water to loosen it up and make it easier to pour. Starting out by heating 2.5 gallons of water in my cooking pot. My IPA recipe calls for a specialty grain, which in this case is a crisp crushed crystal, pre-milled crystal caramel malt. And to get that into the water, we're going to use this steeping bag. I've got the steeping bag full of the grains, and I've started heating the water. The instructions call for heating the water to about 155 degrees. We're getting close to that, so I'll lower this in the water. And I'm going to leave it in there for 15 minutes. I'm using a candy thermometer to keep track of the temperature in there. It's running about 150, so just right where I want it. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes, and I'm ready to take this steeping bag out. So I just set it over here. The next step is we're going to bring this liquid up to a boil. So I'll go ahead and turn up the heat. While that liquid is coming to a boil, I'm just filling up the fermentation bucket with water so I can sanitize it. Okay, my liquid is boiling now. So we're going to go ahead and add the malt extract. And I want to turn off the burner while I do this. It's pretty thick stuff, that's why I wanted to preheat it earlier in the sink with warm water. Pouring in the second can. Okay, now I'm going to bring it back to a boil, so I turn the heat back on. So the next step is to add the hops. My IPA kit came with 2 different types of hops. The first one is the Pilgrim hop pellets, and this is the bittering hops. We're going to add this at the beginning of the boil, and that's going to boil in with the malt extract for about 45 minutes. And then the second hop in this IPA recipe is the Cascade hop, and this is for adding aroma, and we're going to add this at the very last minute. This is what they look like in the packet. They're little green pellets. Okay, the liquid is back to a boil now, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the heat. so I can add the hops. I'm adding the Pilgrim hops first here. Sometimes a boil over can occur when you're adding hops. Doesn't look like that's going to be the case this time. So we'll just stir that in. And at this point we're going to let it boil for 45 minutes. This liquid that we're making here, this pre-beer liquid, is actually called the wort. So we're going to let that wort cook for 45 minutes. Got about 8 minutes left on the boil, so I'm going to start to sanitize my fermentation bucket. And I'm using this Star Sans sanitizing solution. It says 2 ounces per 5 gallons. So I'll just put in my 2 ounces. And this stuff supposedly works immediately. So I'll just let it sit in there. Slosh it around, should be good to go. And then I'm going to give this stuff a good rinse when I'm done. Okay, we got about a minute left here on our boil, so then add the Cascade hops. This is for aroma. So add that to the boil. Okay, boiling is done. The next step is going to be to cool down this wort. So I put a little bit of ice in the sink. I'm filling it up with water, chilling it down to room temperature. This shouldn't take too long. Meanwhile, my fermentation bucket is clean, sanitized, and I've also sanitized the lid, my stirring stick, and the fermentation lock. Once we get this down to room temperature, I'm going to be adding the wort into the fermentation bucket. We're going to fill it up to the 5-gallon mark, which is right there. It's important to emphasize that now that the boiling is done, anything that comes in contact with the wort or the liquid absolutely has to be sanitized. Okay, the wort has cooled down quite a bit in its ice bath, so I'm going to go ahead and add it to the fermentation bucket. And I've already got 3 gallons of water in there. And once we do this, we'll wait for the entire mixture to go down to room temperature. I'm going to put the cover on it just to keep the contaminants out while this continues to cool down. Okay, I moved the fermentation bucket off the sink and I used a sanitized thermometer and took the temperature. It's running about 73 degrees, so we're ready to add the yeast. So I got my little packet of yeast here. Just going to sprinkle it in. Mix it up a little bit. I read somewhere that it's not going to dissolve, so just a little bit of stirring is all that it needs. Adding the oak chips. I put the lid on. Make sure it's really fixed in place because we don't want any air to get in there. And now we're going to put the airlock on. This is the airlock or fermentation lock. What it does is it lets CO2 out without letting any other gases in. My recipe says to fill that up with sanitizer. I've also read you could fill it up with water. I guess just to be on the safe side, I'm going to use the sanitizer. This is about it for now. Fermentation process is going to start. This process is going to take about 3 to 7 days, and after that time we'll be able to bottle it. In about 18 to 24 hours we should see this fermentation lock start to bubble. It's been about 18 hours and fermentation is well underway. Okay, fermentation has been going on for about 6 days now and I think it's pretty much complete. The next step is to bottle the beer. Before I start the process, I am going to take a hydrometer reading, and the main reason for that is just to confirm that the first stage of fermentation is actually complete. This is a hydrometer, and the way it works is it measures the density of liquid, because in more dense liquids, objects are more buoyant. So this hydrometer has a scale on it, and depending on how far up it is when it's floating in the liquid, will give us the hydrometer reading, which is the specific gravity. Took off the lid, and you can see now that we have our beer now, and the first thing I notice is it actually smells like beer. To take my sample from the beer, I have this wine and beer thief, which is basically a glass tube. I've sanitized it. Okay, I've dropped the hydrometer into the flask and I'm getting a reading of about 1.015, which is right about where I want it. We are ready to start bottling, so I've got my bottles here. I've got my bottle capper and some caps and a few other things. We need to transfer the beer now into the secondary bucket. And this is the bottling bucket. It's got a spigot on it. And the way we're going to transfer the beer from the fermentation vessel, the first one, over to this bucket is we're going to use a siphon tube that has a siphon rack on it so that we can pull the liquid out without getting the sediment. Just a few other things I need is the priming sugar, my spoon, and this is a bottle filler. As with the first stage of fermentation, it's really super important to sanitize everything, so I've already started sanitizing the bottles here. This is the first case, and I'm using the same sanitizing solution. It's the Star San. It's diluted in about 5 gallons of water. I need to sanitize the bucket, the tubes, the stirring stick, the bottle caps, everything that's going to come in contact with the beer. I've got all those items in the sanitizer. Now I've got my bottle caps in this bowl. After I rinse everything off, the next step is going to be to get the priming sugar ready. I rinsed off all the bottles, which was kind of a time-consuming process and used quite a bit of water. Next time I'm thinking I might invest in a bottle washer. The next step is to move the beer from the fermentation bucket down to the bottling bucket. So the way we're going to do that is with a siphon. I've got a siphon tube here, and this is a siphon rack, and the siphon rack has a little nozzle at the bottom that keeps the sediment from going into the tube. And the way we're going to start the siphon is to fill this little tube up with water and then attach it to the rack, and that should start the siphon. So let's give it a try. Fill it up with water. I'm going to pinch it off at that end. Attach it to the rack. Lower it in. Bucket's filling up nicely. I almost forgot to add the priming sugar, which is typically done before you move the beer into the bottling bucket. But I've dissolved some sugar in water, heated it up to near boil, and I'm just going to let that cool down. Okay, the priming sugar solution is cooled down, so I'll add it to the beer. Mix it in a little bit. We're ready to start bottling, so I've taken the bottling bucket and moved it up to the countertop, and this is the one that has the spigot on it. For bottling, I'm going to use the same tube I used for siphoning, and it has attached a bottle filler. So the bottle filler has a little push button valve on the top, so I can stick it in the bottle, and when I press it to the bottom, it allows it to fill up. I'm ready to fill my first bottle, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to fill it right up to the top. And then when I take out the filler, it's just going to leave the right amount of air in there. One down, 47 to go. Okay, I filled all the bottles and now I'm ready to put the caps on. And before I do that, there's just one thing I want to mention is the reason I added sugar at the last step is that's going to start the secondary fermentation process. That's what's going to create the CO2 and the pressure in the bottles. Put the bottle cap on. We're just going to place the bottle in the capper here. Place the cap on the bottle. And then push down the lever. It does take quite a bit of pressure. So I just want to press it slowly until it makes that little pop. And then take the bottle off. And now we have a cap bottle. Okay, there we go. 48 bottles filled and capped. So the next step is to put these away for a couple of weeks, let the second stage fermentation take place. And after that, I'm going to chill a few down and give them a taste. It's been a couple weeks since I bottled the beer, so now it's time for the moment of truth. I chilled it down and pop off the top. I can hear the carbonation, so that's a good sign. And pour it. It's got a nice color. It's very good. Definitely as good as some of the craft beers I've had lately. Not as hoppy as some of the IPAs I've had, so if I do this again I'll probably add a lot more hops, but not bad for a first try.